In Millfield Bay, a 70-year-old architect was about to face devastating family betrayal. What started as sorting through her mother's belongings took a shocking turn when she encountered her estranged half-sister. Elena Browns wasn't your typical vulnerable elder. For decades, she had dedicated her life to historic preservation, known for her sharp intellect and fierce determination. When she encountered Vivian clutching forged inheritance documents, she had no idea she was walking into an elaborate scheme. Elena's response would lead to a psychological war, testing her beliefs about justice and mercy. What began as simple inheritance would become a battle for family redemption. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Browns stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom, her 70-year-old hands gripping the brass handle as if it might anchor her to something solid. The Victorian beach house stretched around her like a museum of memories, each room holding the accumulated weight of 3 generations of women who had called this place home. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through the lace curtains her mother had hung 40 years ago. The same curtains Elena had criticized as old-fashioned during one of their many disagreements about preserving the past versus embracing change. Now, standing alone in the silence, she found herself grateful for their persistence. The funeral had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since she'd buried Margaret Browns and inherited the last undeveloped oceanfront property in Millfield Bay. Elena had avoided coming here until today, telling herself she needed time to grieve properly. The truth was more complicated. She'd needed time to prepare for the weight of being the final guardian of everything her family had built. Her architect's eye automatically cataloged the house's condition as she moved through the rooms. The hardwood floors needed refinishing, and there was water damage in the northeast corner where the roof had leaked during last winter's storms. But the bones were solid. The foundation her great-grandfather had laid in 1891 remained true. The hand-carved moldings still held their intricate detail, and the wraparound porch still commanded a view of the bay that made developers salivate. Elena paused at her mother's writing desk, a cherry wood piece that had belonged to her grandmother. Margaret had spent hours here, handling correspondence with the same meticulous care she'd applied to everything else in her ordered life. Elena opened the top drawer, expecting to find the usual collection of stamps and paper clips. Instead, her fingers encountered a small brass key. The key fit a locked drawer Elena had never seen opened. Inside, she discovered a collection of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes bore her mother's careful handwriting, but the name made Elena's breath catch. Vivian Browns, personal and confidential. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon. The correspondence dated back 15 years, monthly letters from her mother to the half-sister who had vanished from their lives after their last explosive argument. Elena read the first letter with growing confusion and hurt. My dearest Vivian, I know you're angry with me, but please understand that some decisions are made to protect, not to punish. The house has been in our family for over a century, and Elena has dedicated her life to preservation work. She understands the responsibility that comes with legacy in ways that Elena set the letter down, unable to continue. Even in death, her mother was justifying choices, explaining why Elena deserved more. The familiar ache of being measured against expectations she'd never quite understood settled in her chest. She was still staring at the letters when she heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Elena moved to the front window, her 70-year-old reflexes still sharp enough to register immediate concern. A black sedan sat behind her own car, and 2 figures were walking toward the front porch. One was unmistakably Vivian, 3 years younger than Elena, but moving with the same proud posture their father had passed to both daughters. The other was a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. Elena's mind raced through possibilities as she watched Vivian climb the front steps. 15 years of silence, and now she appeared the day Elena finally came to sort through their mother's belongings. Not a coincidence. The doorbell rang with the same melodic chime Elena remembered from childhood. She made her way to the front door, each step measured and deliberate. When she opened it, Vivian stood there with tears glistening in her eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. Hello, Elena. Vivian's voice carried the same smoky quality that had made her so persuasive in their youth. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Our loss." "Vivian," Elena stepped back, allowing them entry. "It's been a long time." "Too long." Vivian moved into the foyer with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "This is James Morrison, my attorney. I hope you don't mind. There are some legal matters we need to discuss regarding Mother's estate." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Legal matters?" "The will was read 3 weeks ago. Everything was settled." Morrison opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate, Ms. Browns. My client has documentation indicating that your mother made subsequent provisions that weren't included in the original probate filing." Vivian moved deeper into the house, her eyes taking in the familiar surroundings with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "Mother and I reconciled several years ago, Elena. We had regular correspondence. She felt terrible about how things ended between us, about the family being divided." "You disappeared," Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "You left after that argument about Father's medical bills, and never contacted any of us again." "I left because I was hurt." Vivian's voice took on the wounded tone Elena remembered from their childhood disputes. "But Mother reached out to me. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. She understood that I'd been treated unfairly, that the family resources had always favored you." Morrison withdrew a manila folder from his briefcase. "Your mother executed this amendment to her will approximately 18 months ago. As you can see, it's in her handwriting and properly witnessed." Elena took the document with hands that she willed to remain steady. The handwriting was indeed her mother's, the careful script she'd learned in finishing school in the 1950s. But the words seemed impossible. "I hereby bequeath to my daughter Vivian Chen Browns an equal share in all my real property, including the family home at 127 Ocean Drive, Millfield Bay, recognizing that both my daughters deserve to benefit from our family's legacy." "This isn't possible," Elena whispered. "Mother would never." "She knew how much this house meant to me. She knew I'd dedicated my career to preserving places like this." Vivian moved to the mantelpiece, where family photographs displayed 3 generations of Browns women. She lifted a silver frame containing a photo Elena didn't recognize. Vivian and their mother, both smiling, taken in what appeared to be this very room. "She meant it to be a bridge between us," Vivian said softly. "A way to bring the family back together. She regretted the years we lost, Elena. The years you and I lost." Elena stared at the photograph, her architect's mind automatically noting details. The lighting suggested it was taken in late afternoon. Vivian was wearing a blue dress Elena had never seen. Their mother's hair was shorter than Elena remembered from their last meeting. "When was this taken?" "Last Christmas," Vivian replied. "She invited me for the holidays. We spent 3 wonderful days here, talking about everything. The past, the future, what she wanted her legacy to be." Elena felt something cold settling in her stomach. Last Christmas, she'd been in Portland with her late husband's family, fulfilling obligations she'd felt were more important than visiting her mother. Margaret had said she understood, that she was fine spending the holiday alone. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "The documentation is quite thorough, Ms. Browns. In addition to the will amendment, we have photographs, correspondence, and witness statements confirming that your mother and Ms. Chen Browns had re-established their relationship." Elena's mind reeled through the implications. If this was legitimate, she would be forced to sell the house. The market value was far too high for either sister to buy out the other. The property would go to developers who would demolish the Victorian and build condominiums that would destroy the bay's last undeveloped shoreline. "I need time to review this," Elena said, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "And I'll need my own attorney to examine the documentation." "Of course," Morrison replied smoothly. "We understand this comes as a shock. But I should mention that Ms. Chen Browns is experiencing some financial difficulties that make time a critical factor. She may need to request that the property be placed in immediate trust for sale, unless alternative arrangements can be made quickly." Elena looked at her half-sister, seeing for the first time the carefully concealed desperation in her eyes. Vivian had always been beautiful in a way that made things easier for her, but now Elena noticed the subtle signs of financial stress. The designer handbag with worn corners, the expensive shoes that had been resold, the way she held herself as if expecting disappointment. "How quickly?" Elena asked. "Ideally, within the next 2 weeks," Morrison replied. "The courts prefer to see estate matters resolved expeditiously, especially when there are competing claims." Vivian moved closer to Elena, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd used as a child when she wanted something. "I don't want to fight with you, Elena. I never wanted that. But I can't live in poverty while you have everything." Mother understood that. She wanted both her daughters to be secure. Elena felt the walls of her carefully ordered life beginning to crack. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a woman settling into a peaceful retirement, secure in her legacy and her place in the world. Now she stood in her mother's house, possibly only half her mother's house, facing a sister she hadn't spoken to in 15 years, and legal documents that threatened everything she'd thought was certain. "I'll be in touch within 48 hours, Elena said, moving toward the door in a clear signal that the meeting was over. Morrison packed his briefcase with the same efficiency he'd displayed in unpacking it. "That's perfectly reasonable. My client appreciates your willingness to handle this matter cordially." Vivian paused at the door, looking back at the house with an expression that might have been genuine regret. "I really did miss this place, Elena. And I missed having a sister." After they left, Elena stood alone in the foyer, surrounded by the ghosts of 3 generations of women who had called this house home. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors her great-grandmother had polished by hand. She walked back to her mother's desk and picked up the unfinished letter. The words blurred as she read them again, searching for some clue about what her mother had really intended. But the handwriting seemed to mock her with its careful precision, offering no insight into the thoughts behind the words. Elena moved to the window overlooking the bay, where the last sailboat of the day was heading back to harbor. The developers had been circling for years, waiting for her family to finally sell the last piece of undeveloped waterfront. If Vivian was telling the truth, they might finally get their chance. But something felt wrong about the whole encounter. Elena had spent 50 years reading buildings, understanding how structures could be compromised by hidden damage or poor foundations. She'd developed the same instincts about people and situations, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that Vivian's story had cracks that needed examining. Elena pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Marcus Rivera answered on the second ring. "Elena? I was sorry to hear about your mother. How are you holding up?" "I need to see you, Marcus. Tomorrow morning, if possible. I think I'm about to face the fight of my life, and I can't do it alone." Marcus Rivera's hand tightened around his coffee cup as Elena finished recounting the previous day's confrontation. His law office overlooked Millfield Bay's harbor, where morning fog still clung to the water like smoke from a dying fire. Elena sat across from his mahogany desk, her posture rigid with the kind of controlled tension he'd seen in clients facing their worst nightmares. "Show me the documents again," Marcus said, extending his hand. Elena withdrew the manila folder from her purse with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. Marcus had known her since childhood. His late mother, Rosa, had been Elena's closest friend and business partner for 30 years. He'd grown up hearing stories of Elena's strength, her unwavering principles, and her dedication to preserving what others would carelessly destroy. Seeing her shaken like this activated every protective instinct he possessed. Marcus spread the papers across his desk, his trained eye immediately cataloging inconsistencies. The will amendment bore his mother's seal. Rosa had witnessed thousands of documents in her career as a notary, but something felt wrong about the spacing, the ink quality, the way Margaret Brown's signature sat on the page. "Elena, I need you to prepare yourself for what I'm about to tell you." Marcus looked up from the documents, his expression grim. "These are sophisticated forgeries, extremely sophisticated. Whoever created them knew your mother's handwriting intimately and had access to legal forms from Rosa's office." Elena's face went pale. "You're certain?" "The signature analysis alone would take weeks to prove in court, but I can see 3 clear indicators of forgery right now. The pressure variations are wrong, the letter formations are too perfect, like someone traced them slowly rather than writing naturally, and this witness signature. Marcus pointed to a name at the bottom of the page. This is supposed to be Dr. Patricia Henley, right? Mother's physician for 20 years. Dr. Henley died 18 months ago. I handled her estate. Marcus set the document down carefully. Vivian either didn't know that, or she's counting on you not knowing it. Elena closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, Marcus saw the woman he remembered from his childhood. The one who'd rebuilt her architectural firm after a devastating recession, who'd fought city council for 3 years to save the historic courthouse, who'd never backed down from a challenge in her life. "What are we looking at legally?" she asked. "A complex fraud case that could take years to resolve and cost more than the property is worth." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Vivian's attorney filed preliminary motions yesterday morning. They're claiming your mother was experiencing early cognitive decline when she executed the original will, making this amendment the true expression of her wishes. That's ridiculous. Mother was sharp as a tack until the day she died." "Can you prove that? Do you have medical records, witnesses to her mental acuity, documentation of complex decisions she made in her final months?" Marcus watched Elena's expression change as she realized the challenge they faced. "Vivian's been planning this for a long time, Elena. This isn't desperation, it's strategy." Elena stood and moved to the window, looking out at the bay where her family's house commanded the coastline like a sentinel. What does she gain if she forces a sale? Based on current market values? Approximately $4 million. The house sits on 2 acres of prime oceanfront property. Developers have been circling for years. "And if I fight this?" Marcus pulled a legal pad toward him and began making notes. "We'll need forensic document analysis, handwriting experts, medical records, witness depositions. We're looking at 18 months minimum, probably longer. Legal fees alone could reach $200,000, and that's if we win decisively." Elena turned back to face him. "And if we lose?" "You lose everything. The house, the property, potentially your savings, if she countersues for attorney fees and court costs." Marcus set down his pen. "Elena, I have to ask, is there any possibility your mother actually did reconcile with Vivian? Any chance these documents reflect her real wishes?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena returned to her chair, her movements careful and controlled. "I don't know," she admitted. "Mother never mentioned it, but we weren't. We weren't as close in her final years as I wished we'd been. I was dealing with Henry's illness, then his death, then my own grief. Mother said she understood, but maybe she was lonelier than I realized. That's not your fault. Isn't it?" Elena's voice carried decades of accumulated guilt. "Vivian disappeared after their last fight, and I never tried to bring her back. I was relieved, if I'm honest. She'd always been the dramatic one, the one who stirred up trouble. When she left, things became peaceful, maybe too peaceful." Marcus studied his client, this woman who'd been like a second mother to him, who'd attended his law school graduation, who'd celebrated every major milestone in his life. He'd seen her face down city councils and construction crews, but he'd never seen her doubt herself like this. "Elena, regardless of what happened between you and Vivian, or between Vivian and your mother, these documents are forgeries. That makes this fraud, and fraud is a crime. But proving it means destroying what's left of my family." "What family?" Marcus's voice sharpened with protective anger. "She disappeared for 15 years, then showed up the day after you buried your mother with a lawyer and forged documents. She's not trying to rebuild relationships. She's trying to steal your inheritance." Elena was quiet for several minutes, her eyes focused on something beyond the office windows. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd made a difficult decision. "I need to see Father before we do anything else. If Vivian really did reconcile with Mother, he might know something." Marcus glanced at his watch. "Sunset Manor visiting hours start at 10. I'll drive you." "Marcus, I can." "No arguments. You're not facing this alone." The drive to Sunset Manor took them through Millfield Bay's historic district, past the courthouse Elena had saved, and the Victorian homes she'd helped preserve. Marcus noticed how she studied each building they passed, as if cataloging what she might lose if Vivian succeeded. Sunset Manor sat on a bluff overlooking the bay, its modern architecture carefully designed to complement, rather than compete with the historic landscape below. Elena had chosen it for her father 3 years earlier, when his dementia made independent living impossible. It was expensive, the kind of place that provided dignity along with care, but Elena had insisted Robert Browns deserved the best possible environment for his final years. They found Robert in the sunroom, staring out at the water with the distant expression that had become familiar over the past year. At 95, he remained physically robust, but his mind drifted between past and present like fog rolling across the bay. "Hello, Father." Elena settled into the chair beside him, her voice gentle but clear. Robert turned toward her voice, his eyes taking a moment to focus. "Elena, is that you, sweetheart?" "Yes, it's me. I brought Marcus Rivera." "You remember Marcus? Rosa's son?" "Rosa." Robert's face brightened with recognition. "Beautiful Rosa. She had the most lovely laugh. Is she coming to visit?" Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Rosa had died 2 years earlier, but correcting Robert's confusion would only agitate him. "Father, I need to ask you about Vivian. Have you seen her recently?" Robert's expression shifted, confusion clouding his features. "Vivian, my little girl? She's angry with me. Always angry. I tried to make it right, but I couldn't. I promised her." His voice trailed off, lost in memories that might or might not be real. "What did you promise her, Father?" "She needed help. My little girl needed help. And I couldn't. Margaret said no, but I promised." Robert's agitation was increasing, his hands moving restlessly in his lap. "She came to see me. Pretty dress. Blue dress. Like her mother used to wear." Elena leaned forward. "When did she come to see you, Father?" "Yesterday? Last week?" she cried. Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I made her cry. I made both my girls cry. Margaret wouldn't let me help her, said it would make things worse, but she needed money for the baby." "What baby, Father?" But Robert had retreated into himself, staring out at the water with the blank expression that meant the conversation was over. Elena tried for another 10 minutes to draw him back, but he'd slipped away to whatever place in his mind offered escape from confusion and regret. In the parking lot, Marcus helped Elena into his car while she processed what they learned. He's confirming that Vivian visited him, but his timeline is completely scrambled. And what was that about a baby? "Vivian never had children," Elena said slowly. "But Father might be remembering something from decades ago, or he might be confusing Vivian with someone else entirely. His doctor warned me that false memories are common with his condition." Marcus started the engine, then sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "Elena, I have to tell you something. After you called yesterday, I did some preliminary research on Vivian's situation. She lost her job at the insurance company 6 months ago, downsizing. She's facing eviction from her apartment, her credit cards are maxed out, and she's borrowed against her retirement account." "How do you know all that?" "Public records, mostly. And James Morrison isn't the high-powered attorney he wants you to think he is. He specializes in personal injury cases and has a reputation for aggressive tactics." Elena absorbed this information, feeling pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. So she really is desperate. Desperate enough to forge documents and commit fraud, yes. But Elena, desperation doesn't excuse criminal behavior. And it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice everything you've worked for to save her from the consequences of her choices. Elena stared out at the bay, where afternoon light was beginning to slant across the water. Somewhere out there, her family's house stood on its bluff, holding more than a century of memories and dreams. She thought about her great-grandfather laying the foundation, her grandmother planting the gardens, her mother carefully maintaining every detail. "I need more time to think," she said finally. "How much time do we have?" Morrison said 2 weeks for a state resolution, but I suspect they'll push for faster action if they think I'm building a strong defense. Elena straightened in her seat, and Marcus saw some of her natural strength returning. "I want to talk to Carmen tonight." "And Marcus? Start building our case. Forensic analysis, expert witnesses, whatever it takes." I won't let Vivian steal my family's legacy, but I need to understand why she's really doing this before I decide how to stop her. As they drove back toward town, Elena made a mental list of everything she needed to do. Talk to Carmen, review her mother's financial records, contact Dr. Martinez about her father's condition, visit the house again to look for more evidence. But underneath the practical planning, a deeper question gnawed at her. How had her family fractured so completely that her own sister would resort to forgery and fraud? And more troubling still, what if some part of Vivian's story was true? The familiar warmth of Pescatores wrapped around Elena like an embrace as she settled into the corner booth she and Carmen had claimed as their own for the past decade. The Italian restaurant sat at the edge of Millfield Bay's historic district, its exposed brick walls lined with photographs chronicling the town's evolution from fishing village to affluent coastal community. Elena had arrived early, needing the comfort of familiar surroundings before facing the conversation ahead. Carmen Santos appeared in the doorway at exactly 7 o'clock, her silver hair catching the restaurant's soft lighting as she scanned the room. At 52, Carmen moved with the confident grace of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating construction sites and city planning meetings. When she spotted Elena, her expression immediately shifted from casual greeting to concerned friend. "You look terrible," Carmen said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from Elena. "And coming from someone who's seen you pull all-nighters during the courthouse renovation. That's saying something." Elena managed a weak smile. "I've had better days. Start from the beginning." "Your message said Vivian was back and causing legal trouble, but I need details." Elena had rehearsed this conversation during the drive over, but sitting across from her oldest friend, the words came out in a rush. She described Vivian's arrival, the forged documents, Marcus's analysis, and her father's confused testimony. Carmen listened without interruption, her dark eyes growing increasingly serious as the story unfolded. "Son of a bitch," Carmen muttered when Elena finished. "Excuse my French, but your sister has some nerve." "Half-sister," Elena corrected automatically. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't." Carmen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd known Elena through 3 decades of personal and professional challenges. "Don't diminish what she's doing by making technical distinctions. She's family, and she's betraying that bond for money. It's unconscionable." Elena felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. Carmen had always possessed the ability to cut through emotional complexity and identify the core issues. It was what had made her such an effective business partner and what made her friendship so valuable now. "There's something else," Elena said. "I found letters in Mother's desk. Correspondence with Vivian going back years. I only read the first one, but it suggested they'd been in contact." Carmen frowned. "Margaret never mentioned that to me, and you know your mother wasn't one to keep secrets from her friends." Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she felt guilty about the way things ended with Vivian and was trying to make amends privately. Or maybe Vivian manipulated a lonely old woman into feeling guilty about choices she had every right to make. Carmen's loyalty was fierce and uncomplicated. "Elena, your mother chose to leave you the house because she trusted you to preserve it. Because she knew you'd spent your career protecting places like this, while Vivian spent hers running away from responsibility." Before Elena could respond, a young woman approached their table. Isabella Santos had inherited her mother's striking features and added her own generation's blend of idealism and technological savvy. At 25, she worked for one of the state's most respected elder law firms, while pursuing her master's degree in gerontology. "Mom said you needed reinforcements," Isabella said, kissing Elena's cheek before settling beside her mother. "And when Elena Browns needs legal backup, it must be serious." Elena had watched Isabella grow from the precocious child who used to visit the architectural firm into the accomplished young woman who now advocated for elderly clients facing exploitation and abuse. Having her here felt like gathering family rather than simply seeking advice. "Tell her," Carmen instructed. Elena repeated her story, watching Isabella's expression grow increasingly troubled. When she finished, Isabella was already pulling out her laptop. "Sophisticated document forgery targeting elderly estates is unfortunately common," Isabella said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But there are digital forensic techniques that can prove fraud even when the forgeries are excellent. Ink analysis, paper aging, pressure patterns. We can build an airtight case. Marcus mentioned it could take months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Traditional litigation, yes, but there are alternatives. Isabella turned her laptop screen toward Elena. Emergency injunctions to prevent property transfers while fraud is investigated. Fast-track forensic analysis through the state crime lab. And if we can prove elder financial abuse, there are criminal penalties that might motivate a quick confession. Carmen leaned forward. What's the timeline for stopping her? Quote, if Vivian tries to force immediate sale, we file for emergency relief. But Elena, I need to ask you something difficult. Isabella's expression grew serious. Have you considered the possibility that your mother really did have contact with Vivian? That maybe some of what she's claiming is true, even if the documents are forged? Elena had been dreading this question. I don't know. Mother was lonely after Henry died, and I was dealing with my own grief. Maybe I wasn't as available as I should have been. Stop that right now, Carmen said sharply. You were dealing with losing your husband of 43 years. Margaret understood that, and she never complained about spending time alone. But what if Vivian filled that loneliness? What if Mother really did want to reconcile and include her in the inheritance? Isabella closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. Elena, even if your mother had contact with Vivian, even if she felt guilty about their estrangement, the documents Vivian presented are still forgeries. That means her claims are fraudulent, regardless of any underlying emotional truth. But it complicates the moral questions, Elena said quietly. No, it doesn't. Carmen's voice was firm. Your sister chose fraud over honest conversation. She chose deception over reconciliation. Whatever your mother's feelings might have been, Vivian's response was criminal. Isabella nodded. Mom's right. And there's something else you should know. I did some preliminary research on James Morrison while you were talking. He's been disciplined twice by the state bar for aggressive tactics in estate disputes. This isn't his first questionable case. Elena felt a chill. What kind of tactics? Pressuring elderly clients to make hasty decisions, threatening criminal charges when none exist, filing frivolous lawsuits to force settlements. Isabella's expression was grim. He preys on people who can't afford prolonged legal battles. Well, he picked the wrong target this time, Carmen said. Elena Browns doesn't intimidate easily. Elena wasn't feeling particularly strong at the moment, but she drew comfort from her friends. Confidence. What do we do next? We build a fortress, Isabella said. Document everything, preserve all evidence, and prepare for war. But Elena, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't let guilt about family relationships cloud your judgment about criminal behavior. Vivian made her choices 15 years ago when she walked away, and she's making them now with these forged documents. You're not responsible for fixing a relationship she's trying to exploit. Carmen reached across the table and covered Elena's hand with her own. We've got your back, Elena. All of us. Vivian thinks she's dealing with a vulnerable old woman, but she's about to learn she's fighting a family. A real family, built on loyalty and truth instead of blood and manipulation. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the fear that had gripped her since yesterday's confrontation. She wasn't facing this alone. She had people who understood what the house meant, who knew her values, who would help her protect what mattered most. Thank you, she said simply. Thank us by fighting, Carmen replied. Your great-grandfather built that house with his own hands. Your grandmother survived the Depression to keep it in the family. Your mother preserved it through decades of development pressure. You're not going to let it fall to fraud on your watch. Elena straightened her shoulders, feeling her architect's instincts awakening. She'd spent her career analyzing structural problems and finding solutions. This was just another kind of restoration project, preserving something valuable that was under threat. Elena gripped the pier railing as the implications hit her. You've been in contact with her for 3 years? On and off. She felt guilty about the way things ended between us. about taking Robert's side in that last fight. She started sending me money, small amounts at first, then larger sums when she realized how badly I was struggling. Vivian pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. She was planning to change her will, Elena. She really was. She wanted to make things right. Then why forge documents? If she was planning to include you, why not wait for her to do it legally? Vivian's composure crumbled entirely. Because she died before she could follow through. She'd made the appointment with her attorney, but then she had that heart attack and everything changed. I was left with nothing but promises and a few letters talking about her intentions. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet again. Could this be true? Had her mother been planning changes that death had prevented? Vivian, even if mother intended to include you in her will, forgery is still what? Still wrong? Vivian's desperation transformed into anger. You think I don't know that? You think I'm proud of what I'm doing? I'm facing homelessness, Elena. I'm too old to rebuild a career, too proud to declare bankruptcy, and too desperate to care about legal niceties. Elena studied her sister's face, searching for signs of deception but finding only raw desperation. If you'd come to me honestly, if you'd explained your situation, would you have helped? Really? Would the sister who never called, never visited, never acknowledged my existence have suddenly opened her checkbook out of family loyalty? The question hung between them like an accusation. Elena wanted to say yes, wanted to believe she would have responded with generosity and understanding. But the truth was more complicated. She'd written Vivian off years ago, categorizing her as irresponsible and self-destructive. Would she really have welcomed a plea for financial help? I might have, Elena said finally, but you never gave me the chance. Because I knew what the answer would be. The same answer it's always been, that I need to take responsibility for my own choices, that I can't expect the family to bail me out of problems I created. Vivian's voice was gaining strength, fed by years of accumulated resentment. Well, I'm done asking for permission to survive. Mother intended for me to inherit half of this property, and I'm going to claim what should have been mine all along. Elena felt her own anger rising. By committing fraud? By stealing what doesn't belong to you? By taking what was promised to me? By finally claiming my share of a family that never had room for me? Vivian stepped closer, her desperation now edged with something harder. You got everything, Elena. The house, the career, the perfect marriage, the respect. I got nothing but disappointment and judgment. Well, now it's my turn. Elena looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw not the calculated manipulator she'd imagined but a broken woman making one last desperate grab for security. It didn't excuse the forgery, but it explained it in ways that made Elena's heart ache. Vivian, I can help you, not with the house. I can't give you that, but I can help you financially. We can work something out that doesn't involve fraud or legal battles. Vivian shook her head violently. I don't want your charity. I want what I deserve, what Mother intended me to have. But she didn't intend it, did she? If she had, she would have made it legal. She would have followed through with the attorney appointment. Vivian's face crumpled. She ran out of time. Or she changed her mind. Or she realized that dividing the property would mean destroying it. Elena's voice gentled. Vivian, I understand why you're doing this, but it's wrong, and it won't solve your real problems. My real problems? Vivian's desperation was transforming back into anger. My real problem is that I'm the daughter who didn't matter enough to include in the will. The one who wasn't worth a phone call when our mother was dying. Elena felt the guilt she'd been carrying since the funeral expand in her chest. I should have called you. I should have made sure you knew. Yes, you should have. But you didn't because even in death, Mother belonged to you, just like everything else always has. The conversation was spiraling into the same destructive patterns that had characterized their relationship for decades. Elena could see the futility of trying to reason with desperation this profound. I can't give you the house, Vivian. But I won't let you take it through fraud either. Vivian's expression hardened. Then I guess we'll see what a jury thinks about family obligations and broken promises. She turned and walked toward shore, leaving Elena alone at the end of the pier with the growing realization that this battle would be far uglier than she'd imagined. Vivian wasn't just claiming property, she was claiming a lifetime of perceived injustices. And she was prepared to burn down what remained of their family to get what she believed she deserved. Elena stood there long after Vivian disappeared, watching the fishing boats navigate the harbor entrance and thinking about promises, intentions, and the devastating power of desperation. The conversation had answered some questions while raising others that cut deeper than legal technicalities. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elena wondered if she truly understood what her mother had wanted, or what justice really looked like when family love and family damage were so hopelessly intertwined. Elena discovered Vivian's new strategy the hard way when she arrived at her Thursday book club meeting to find her sister already seated at the familiar corner table of Millfield Bay's historic library. The monthly gathering of 12 longtime residents had been Elena's sanctuary for over a decade, a place where she could discuss literature and current events with people who valued thoughtful conversation over social posturing. Today, that sanctuary felt violated. "Elena, dear." Vivian rose from her chair with practiced grace, her voice carrying just the right note of familial warmth. "I hope you don't mind. I asked Margaret if I could join today's discussion. I've always loved Jane Austen, and when I mentioned how much I missed our family's intellectual traditions, she was kind enough to include me." Margaret Hartwell, the group's elderly organizer, beamed with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd facilitated a family reunion. "Isn't this wonderful? Vivian was just telling us about the years she spent caring for your dear mother during her illness. Such devotion." Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the scope of Vivian's manipulation. Every person in this room represented decades of friendship, community involvement, and professional relationships. They were witnessing what appeared to be a heartwarming family reconciliation, completely unaware of the legal warfare happening behind the scenes. "How thoughtful of you to join us, Vivian," Elena managed, taking her usual seat while her mind raced through response options. Any confrontation here would make her look petty and vindictive. Vivian had chosen her battlefield perfectly. The discussion of persuasion proceeded with Vivian, offering insightful commentary about second chances and the wisdom that comes with age. She spoke eloquently about Anne Elliot's patience and forgiveness, drawing parallels to her own experience of estrangement and reconciliation. Several members nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by the depth of her literary knowledge and the grace with which she handled what they assumed was an awkward family situation. "It's fascinating how Austen explores the theme of inherited property and family obligation," Vivian said during a lull in conversation. "The way Sir Walter's financial irresponsibility threatens the family estate really resonates with contemporary issues about elder care and family responsibility." Elena recognized the trap. Vivian was laying groundwork for her narrative about Elena's failure to support family members in need. Austen was certainly interested in the intersection of money and morality, Elena replied carefully, though she generally favored characters who chose honor over financial gain. True, but she also understood that survival sometimes requires difficult choices. Vivian countered. Anne Elliot's strength isn't in maintaining rigid principles. It's in her willingness to forgive past hurts and embrace new possibilities. The subtext was clear to Elena, even if the others missed it. Vivian was positioning herself as the wronged party, seeking reconciliation, while painting Elena as the inflexible sister clinging to old grievances. After the meeting, several members approached Elena with comments about how lovely it was to see the family healing old wounds. Mrs. Patterson, who'd known Elena since childhood, actually teared up while describing Vivian's obvious devotion to their late mother. "She told us about those wonderful Christmas visits," Mrs. Patterson said. "How your mother's face would light up when Vivian arrived. It's beautiful that she was able to provide such comfort in Margaret's final years." Elena smiled and nodded while internally cataloging another piece of Vivian's carefully constructed mythology. How many people in town had heard similar stories? How many would serve as character witnesses if this went to trial? The next assault came Friday morning at Elena's regular coffee shop, where she encountered David Chen sitting alone at a corner table. Elena had known David peripherally for decades, He'd been a quiet, steady presence in Vivian's life during their marriage and a ghost after their divorce. Seeing him now, she was struck by how much he'd aged. At 72, he looked fragile in a way that spoke of more than just physical decline. "Elena," he said as she passed his table. "Could I have a word?" Elena hesitated, then sat across from him. David had always seemed like collateral damage in Vivian's dramatic life, rather than an active participant in her schemes. "I want you to know I'm not comfortable with this situation," David said without preamble. "But Vivian is... she's not well, Elena. Emotionally, financially, spiritually. She's drowning, and she's grabbing on to whatever might save her." "Including fraud?" David winced. "I don't know about the legal details. What I know is that she's been struggling for years, that your mother did send her money, and that she genuinely believed there would be provisions made for her in the will." Elena studied his weathered face, looking for signs of deception. "Are you willing to testify to that in court? If it comes to that, yes. Not because I think what she's doing is right, but because I think she's in genuine need and doesn't know any other way to ask for help." She could have asked directly. Could she? Really? David's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades managing Vivian's emotional volatility. "When's the last time you two had a conversation that didn't end in hurt feelings or angry words? She's been afraid of rejection her entire life, Elena. This lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about finally being acknowledged as part of the family." Elena felt a familiar frustration. "So I'm supposed to reward fraud because she was afraid to have an honest conversation?" "I'm not saying that. I'm saying that maybe there's a solution here that doesn't require destroying each other." David leaned forward. "She's not the villain you think she is, Elena. She's just a scared old woman who's made some terrible choices." Before Elena could respond, David stood and left, leaving her to wrestle with his words over coffee that had grown cold. Was she missing something crucial about Vivian's motivations? Or was David himself another victim of her sister's manipulation? The answer came that afternoon when Marcus called with disturbing news. "Vivian's escalating," he said without preamble. "Morrison filed a motion this morning claiming you're experiencing cognitive decline and may not be competent to handle your mother's estate." Elena felt the room spin. "What?" "They're citing your age, recent stress from Henry's death, and alleged erratic behavior as evidence that you need a court-appointed guardian to protect your interests." Marcus's anger was palpable through the phone. "It's a fishing expedition designed to delay proceedings while they build their case. But it's also a public attack on your mental competency." "Can they do that?" "They can try. It'll fail. You're obviously as sharp as you've ever been, but the filing is public record. Anyone can read the allegations." Elena sank into her favorite chair, feeling the walls of her carefully ordered life closing in. "She's trying to destroy my reputation. She's trying to win at any cost." "Elena, there's something else." Morrison also filed for emergency interim support, claiming Vivian needs immediate financial assistance, while the estate is being contested. They want the court to order you to provide her with living expenses and attorney fees. Elena closed her eyes. "How much?" $5,000 a month, plus all legal costs. It could bankrupt you before we even get to trial." Elena felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. The sister who'd claimed to want family reconciliation was systematically destroying her life, her reputation, and her financial security. The woman who'd spoken so eloquently about forgiveness and second chances was willing to sacrifice Elena's well-being to get what she wanted. "Marcus, I want you to fight this with everything we have. No more trying to understand her motivations or find middle ground. She's made her choice, and now I'm making mine." "Elena, I've spent 2 days trying to find compassion for her situation, trying to understand her desperation. But this attack on my mental competency crosses a line. She's not just trying to take my property, she's trying to destroy my dignity. I won't let that happen." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure? Once we escalate, there's no going back to family discussions and negotiated settlements." Elena thought about the book club ambush, David's manipulation disguised as concern, and now the legal assault on her competency. Vivian wasn't interested in reconciliation. She was waging total war while maintaining the pretense of victimhood. "I'm sure. File whatever motions you need to file. Hire whatever experts we need." And Marcus? I want you to investigate everything about Vivian's finances, her recent activities, her relationship with Morrison. If she wants to fight dirty, let's see how much scrutiny she can withstand." Elena hung up and sat in the gathering dusk, feeling something fundamental shift inside her. For 3 days, she'd tried to balance justice with mercy, law with family loyalty. But Vivian had made that balance impossible. She'd chosen warfare over reconciliation, public humiliation over private conversation. Elena had spent her career preserving things of value against forces that would destroy them. This was no different. Vivian wanted to tear down everything Elena had built: her reputation, her financial security, her family legacy. Well, Elena thought grimly, let her try. She was about to learn that some structures were built to withstand more pressure than desperate people could bring to bear. And some fights, once begun, would be finished on the defender's terms rather than the aggressor's timeline. The battle for Elena's life and legacy was about to begin in earnest. Elena felt the sharp pain in her chest while reviewing Marcus's latest legal filing, a 30-page response to Vivian's competency challenge that laid out her sister's deceptions in meticulous detail. The pain started as pressure, like someone pressing their fist against her breastbone, then radiated down her left arm with alarming intensity. She set the documents aside and tried to breathe deeply, but the pain only intensified. Cold sweat beaded on her forehead as she reached for her phone with trembling fingers. Carmen answered on the second ring. "Elena? What's wrong?" Quote, I think I'm having a heart attack." Carmen's voice shifted into crisis mode. "I'm calling 911. Don't move, don't do anything. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The next hour passed in a blur of paramedics, flashing lights, and the controlled chaos of Millfield Bay General's emergency room. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived while Elena was still connected to monitoring equipment, her face grave as she reviewed the test results. "Not a heart attack," Dr. Martinez said, settling into the chair beside Elena's hospital bed. "But you came close. What we're seeing is severe stress-induced cardiac symptoms. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, your heart rhythm is irregular, and your body is essentially screaming for you to slow down." Elena tried to sit up straighter, but Dr. Martinez gently pressed her back against the pillows. "How dangerous is dangerously elevated?" "Dangerous enough that I'm keeping you overnight for observation. Elena, you're 70 years old. You've buried your husband and your mother in the past 3 years. Now you're dealing with a high-stress legal battle that's consuming your every waking moment. Your body can't sustain this level of pressure indefinitely. The legal situation isn't going away just because my heart doesn't like it." Dr. Martinez's expression softened with the kind of compassion Elena had come to appreciate during their 3-year professional relationship. "No, but you might if you don't manage this stress differently. I've seen too many patients your age literally worry themselves to death over estate disputes. Is winning this battle worth dying before you can enjoy the victory?" Before Elena could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. Elena expected Carmen or Marcus, but instead Vivian appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely distressed and carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop. "May I come in?" Vivian's voice was subdued, lacking the calculated warmth Elena had grown accustomed to over the past week. Elena nodded, curiosity overriding her anger. Vivian approached the bed hesitantly, setting the flowers on the nightstand before taking the visitor's chair. "I heard what happened," Vivian said quietly. "David called me. He was having coffee at the shop next to the medical building when the ambulance arrived. And you came because—" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Because despite everything that's happened between us, I don't want you to die, Elena. I may be desperate, I may be angry, but I'm not a monster." Elena studied her sister's face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. What she saw instead was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "The doctors say it's stress-related," Elena said. "From the lawsuit." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "From what I've put you through." Among other things. Vivian stood and moved to the window, looking out at the bay where their family's house sat silhouetted against the evening sky. I never wanted it to go this far. When Morrison suggested the competency challenge, I told him it was too much. But he said it was standard legal strategy, that these kinds of motions were just part of the process. Elena felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Was he wrong? He wasn't wrong about the legal strategy. He was wrong about what it would cost. Vivian turned back toward the bed, tears visible in her eyes. I've been so focused on what I thought I deserved that I forgot about what I might destroy to get it. Vivian, let me finish. Please. Vivian returned to her chair, leaning forward earnestly. Seeing you here, connected to all these machines because of the stress I've caused. It's made me realize that even if I win the lawsuit, I'll have lost something more important. Elena wanted to believe what she was hearing, but 3 decades of family dysfunction had taught her to be cautious about Vivian's emotional appeals. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe there's another way to resolve this, something that doesn't require destroying each other in court. Before Elena could respond, Carmen burst through the door with Marcus close behind. Both stopped short when they saw Vivian, their expressions shifting from concern to suspicion. What's she doing here? Carmen's voice carried protective anger. Visiting her sister, Elena said firmly. Vivian was just telling me she might be interested in exploring alternatives to litigation. Marcus moved closer to the bed, his attorney instincts clearly on high alert. What kind of alternatives? Vivian looked between Carmen and Marcus, then back to Elena. I don't know yet. But maybe something that acknowledges both our needs without requiring a winner-takes-all court battle. Carmen crossed her arms. After you've accused Elena of mental incompetence and tried to destroy her reputation in the community? I know how it looks, Vivian said. I know I've made terrible choices. But Elena could have died tonight because of the stress I've caused. That has to matter more than property or money or who is right about what happened 40 years ago. Elena felt Dr. Martinez's words echoing in her mind. Is winning this battle worth dying before you can enjoy the victory? The irony wasn't lost on her that Vivian's presence in the hospital room was the first honest conversation they'd had since this nightmare began. Marcus, what would happen if we withdrew all the motions and started over? Elena asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Elena, I don't think you should be making major legal decisions while you're in the hospital. The stress is exactly why I need to consider this. Elena's voice carried the authority that had served her well through decades of difficult architectural projects. I spent today reading 30 pages of legal arguments about why my sister is a fraud and a liar. Tomorrow there will be 30 more pages about why I'm mentally incompetent. How many pages of accusations and counter-accusations am I supposed to endure before this kills me? Carmen sat on the edge of the bed, taking Elena's hand. Honey, Vivian has been playing games since day one. Don't let one hospital visit convince you she's changed. Maybe she hasn't changed, Elena said. But maybe I need to. Maybe there's a difference between justice and revenge, and I've been too angry to see it. Vivian wiped her eyes with a tissue from the nightstand. I have been playing games, Carmen's right about that. But sitting here watching, Elena hooked up to heart monitors because of choices I made. It's clarifying. Some victories aren't worth the cost. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm going to step outside and call Morrison. See if he's willing to discuss settlement options. Marcus, wait. Elena's voice stopped him at the door. Before you do that, I need to ask Vivian something directly. She turned to her sister. The forged documents. Are you willing to admit they're fake? Vivian was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if she would answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Yes. The will amendment is fake. I had it created by someone who specializes in document recreation. The photographs were real. I did visit Mother several times over the past few years, but the legal papers were forgeries. Carmen's grip on Elena's hand tightened. Then this whole thing has been fraud from the beginning. Yes, Vivian said simply. But the emotional truth underneath the fraud was real. Mother did feel guilty about our estrangement. She did send me money. She did talk about wanting to make things right. I couldn't wait for her to figure out how to do it legally. Elena closed her eyes, feeling pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Her mother's secret correspondence with Vivian, Her father's confused testimony about promises, Vivian's desperate financial situation, all of it painted a picture of family dysfunction that went much deeper than legal technicalities. "So what do we do now?" Elena asked. Vivian stood up slowly, looking older than her 67 years. "I don't know. But I know that watching you nearly have a heart attack over something I did, that's not the legacy I want to leave. Whatever we figure out, it has to start with me taking responsibility for the choices I've made." Elena looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative schemer she'd been fighting, but a broken woman who'd made terrible choices out of desperation and fear. It didn't excuse the fraud, but it opened a door to something other than total warfare. "Dr. Martinez," Elena called to her physician, who'd been quietly observing from the corner. "How long do I need to stay here?" "Until tomorrow afternoon, assuming your numbers stabilize overnight." "Good. That gives us time to think." Elena turned back to Vivian. "I want you to come back tomorrow morning. We're going to have the conversation we should have had 15 years ago. Honest, painful, and without lawyers. And then we're going to figure out what justice really looks like when it's tempered with mercy." Vivian nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I'll be here." As her sister left, Elena settled back against the hospital pillows, feeling something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with cardiac stress. For the first time since this battle began, she wondered if there might be a way to preserve her family's legacy without destroying what remained of her family itself. The question was whether mercy and justice could coexist, or if choosing one meant sacrificing the other entirely. Isabella Santos moved through the beach house like a detective, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and a portable scanner tucked under her arm. Elena had given her complete access to search for any additional evidence that might support their case, but what Isabella hoped to find was something that would make a case unnecessary altogether. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains Elena's mother had hung decades ago, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floors. Isabella had spent summers in this house as a child, tagging along when her mother Carmen came to work on architectural projects with Elena. She knew the building's quirks and hiding places better than most family members would. Elena was still in the hospital for observation, giving Isabella the solitude she needed for thorough investigation. Carmen had wanted to come along, but Isabella had insisted on working alone. Sometimes secrets revealed themselves only to patient, methodical searching. She started in Margaret Brown's bedroom, the room where Elena had discovered the first cache of letters. Isabella pulled out drawers completely, checking for false backs or hidden compartments. She examined the writing desk inch by inch, looking for additional locked drawers or concealed spaces. Behind the desk, she found what she was looking for, a loose baseboard that had been carefully replaced but showed subtle signs of recent disturbance. Isabella pried it away from the wall with a letter opener, revealing a narrow space that contained a manila envelope sealed with tape. Inside were documents that made Isabella's breath catch: bank records, canceled checks, and correspondence that painted a picture of financial support far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Margaret Browns had been sending Vivian money for over 5 years. Not just occasional assistance, but substantial monthly payments totaling nearly $80,000. Isabella spread the papers across the bed, her legal training helping her make sense of the timeline. The payments had started small, $500 here, $1,000 there, but had increased dramatically after Robert's admission to Sunset Manor. By the final year of Margaret's life, she'd been sending Vivian $3,000 monthly. More disturbing were the letters that accompanied many of the payments. Margaret's careful handwriting revealed a woman consumed by guilt about family dynamics she'd never fully understood. "My dearest Vivian, I know this money cannot make up for the years of feeling overlooked, but please understand that my love for you was never less than my love for Elena. I simply expressed it differently because your needs seemed different. Elena craved responsibility and legacy. You craved freedom and independence. I thought I was honoring those differences, but I see now that I may have created the very inequality I was trying to avoid." Isabella photographed each document with her phone before continuing her search. In the kitchen, she found more evidence of Vivian's presence. Grocery receipts for meals obviously intended for more than one person, prescription bottles with both Margaret's and Vivian's names, even a spare key hidden under a ceramic pot that showed signs of regular use. The picture emerging was of two women, mother and daughter, who had indeed reconciled, but in secret, away from the judgment of family members who had written Vivian off as irresponsible. Margaret had been quietly supporting her younger daughter while maintaining the fiction that they remained estranged. But the most shocking discovery came in Margaret's study, tucked inside a first-edition copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, the same novel Vivian had discussed so eloquently at the book club meeting. Inside the front cover, Margaret had written a letter dated just 6 months before her death. To my daughters, Elena and Vivian. If you are reading this, then I have failed to resolve during my lifetime the damage I caused through years of unintentional favoritism. Elena, you were the daughter who never needed mothering in the traditional sense. Strong, capable, destined for success, regardless of my input. Vivian, you were the daughter who needed more from me but received less because I confused your emotional needs with weakness. I was wrong. Isabella sat heavily in Margaret's reading chair, scanning the rest of the letter with growing amazement. Margaret had indeed been planning to change her will. Not to give Vivian half the property, but to create a trust that would provide her with lifetime financial security while preserving the house for Elena's stewardship. She'd had meetings with attorneys, drawn up preliminary documents, and even scheduled the final signing appointment. The appointment she'd missed because she'd died of a sudden heart attack the night before. I want Elena to have the house because she understands the responsibility of preservation. But I want Vivian to have security because I failed to provide her with the emotional foundation she needed to create it for herself. If something happens to me before I can formalize these arrangements, I hope my daughters will find a way to honor both needs. The house matters, but family matters more. Isabella's hands trembled as she photographed the letter. This changed everything. Vivian's claim about Margaret's intentions wasn't entirely fabricated. It was just tragically incomplete. Margaret really had wanted to provide for both daughters, but death had prevented her from making it legal. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How's the search going? Found anything useful? Instead of responding immediately, Isabella continued through the house, now looking for evidence of the legal consultations Margaret had mentioned. In a filing cabinet in the study, she found them: notes from meetings with 3 different estate attorneys, photocopies of trust documents from other families, even a business card for a financial planner who specialized in multi-generational wealth preservation. The timeline was clear. Margaret Browns had spent the final months of her life trying to create a solution that would honor both daughters' needs while preserving the family legacy. She'd been working toward a complex trust arrangement that would have given Elena ownership and stewardship of the property while providing Vivian with a guaranteed income stream and shared use of certain portions of the house. It was elegant, fair, and exactly the kind of thoughtful solution Elena might have designed if she'd been asked to mediate between competing architectural preservation needs. But Margaret had died before signing the final documents, leaving behind only intentions and the guilt-ridden secrecy that had made those intentions seem impossible to honor. Isabella spent another hour searching, finding more evidence of the relationship between Margaret and Vivian: birthday cards saved in a jewelry box, photographs tucked between books, even a spare set of reading glasses that clearly weren't Margaret's prescription. The two women had been close. Closer, perhaps, than Margaret had been with Elena during those final years when grief over Henry's death had created distance between the sisters and their mother. By noon, Isabella had compiled a complete record of her discoveries. She packed everything carefully, uploaded all the photographs to a secure cloud storage account, and prepared to deliver news that would complicate everyone's understanding of the current legal battle. But first, she needed to process what she'd learned. Margaret Browns had died carrying the weight of family guilt she'd been unable to resolve. Vivian had been abandoned to face poverty and old age, after losing the secret financial support that had sustained her for years. Elena had inherited not just property, but the burden of family dysfunction she'd never fully understood. The forgery was still a crime. Vivian's legal strategy was still fraud. But underneath the criminal behavior was a tragedy of miscommunication, failed timing, and love expressed so quietly that its absence had created the very desperation it had been intended to prevent. Isabella locked the house and drove directly to Millfield Bay General, where she found Elena sitting up in bed reviewing legal documents while Carmen paced by the window. Both women looked up expectantly when Isabella entered with her laptop bag and the manila envelope. "I found Margaret's real will," Isabella said without preamble. "Or rather, I found evidence of what she wanted her real will to be." Elena set aside her papers. "What do you mean?" Isabella pulled out her laptop and began displaying the photographs she'd taken. "Your mother was planning to change her will, Elena." She'd been working with attorneys for months to create a trust that would have provided for both you and Vivian. Carmen stopped pacing. "Both of them?" Elena would have inherited the house with full preservation responsibilities and stewardship rights, but Vivian would have received a substantial trust fund, enough to provide lifetime financial security, plus shared usage rights to certain portions of the property. Isabella scrolled through the images of legal consultations and preliminary documents. It was actually a brilliant solution. It honored Elena's dedication to preservation while addressing Vivian's need for security. Elena stared at the laptop screen, showing her mother's handwritten letter. She really was planning to include Vivian. More than that, she'd been secretly supporting Vivian for 5 years. Nearly $80,000 in total payments, plus emotional support and regular contact. Isabella pulled out the bank records. "Elena, your mother felt terrible about the family dynamics. She blamed herself for creating inequality between you and Vivian." Carmen sat heavily in the visitor's chair. So Vivian was telling the truth about their relationship. Partially. They did reconcile. Margaret did intend to provide for her, and Margaret did feel guilty about perceived favoritism. But Vivian's legal documents are still forgeries, and Margaret never intended to give her half ownership of the property. Elena was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the implications. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "So Mother died before she could fix what she saw as her mistakes. And Vivian panicked when the support payments stopped and there was no legal provision for their continuation," Isabella added. "She was facing homelessness after years of depending on assistance she couldn't acknowledge publicly." Carmen shook her head slowly. "This explains David's testimony about promises. Robert probably knew about Margaret's intentions, even if he couldn't remember the details." Elena looked up from the laptop screen. "Isabella, legally, what does this mean for our case?" "The forgery is still fraud, regardless of Margaret's intentions. But these documents provide context that could influence both criminal prosecution and civil resolution. A prosecutor might be more lenient knowing Vivian was acting on reasonable, if legally unfounded, expectations. And these materials give us a roadmap for settlement negotiations that might honor what Margaret actually wanted." Elena leaned back against her pillows, looking exhausted but thoughtful. "So we could destroy Vivian legally for fraud, or we could try to create the solution Mother died before implementing." "Those are the choices," Isabella confirmed. "The question is what kind of justice you want to pursue, punitive or restorative." Carmen moved to Elena's bedside. "What are you thinking?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window toward the bay where her family's house stood, as it had for over a century. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd discovered that the battle she'd been fighting was more complicated than she'd understood. "I'm thinking that Mother spent the last months of her life trying to heal damage she blamed herself for creating. And I'm wondering if the greatest honor I could give her memory would be to finish what she started." Isabella closed her laptop. "That's going to require some very difficult conversations with Vivian." "Yes," Elena said. "But for the first time since this nightmare began, I think those might be conversations worth having." Elena sat in the hospital's family conference room the next morning, the manila envelope Isabella had discovered spread across the small table like evidence in a trial. Vivian arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by David Chen, but notably without James Morrison. Her sister looked haggard, as if she'd spent the night wrestling with decisions that had no comfortable outcomes. "Thank you for coming without your attorney," Elena said, as Vivian took the chair across from her. "Morrison wanted to be here, but I told him this needed to be between family." Vivian's voice was subdued, lacking the desperate edge that had characterized their recent encounters. David insisted on coming as a witness, not as an advocate. David settled into a corner chair, his presence reassuring but unobtrusive. Elena had asked Marcus to wait outside. This conversation needed to happen without legal counsel shaping every word. Elena pushed the envelope toward Vivian. "Before we talk about anything else, I need you to see what Isabella found yesterday." Vivian opened the envelope with trembling hands, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, to tears, as she examined the contents. She lingered longest over Margaret's handwritten letter, reading it twice before setting it down with shaking fingers. "She really was planning to provide for me," Vivian whispered. "She was planning to provide for both of us," Elena corrected gently, in a way that honored what she saw as each daughter's needs and strengths. Vivian picked up the bank records, scanning the dates and amounts of payments that had sustained her for 5 years. $80,000. I never added it up before, but she gave me $80,000. Money you needed and deserved, according to her letters. Elena's voice carried no accusation, only recognition of complicated family truths. "Vivian, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about Mother's meetings with attorneys? Did you know she was working toward a formal trust arrangement?" Vivian wiped her eyes with a tissue David quietly provided. "She mentioned talking to lawyers about making things right, but she never gave me details. I thought she was just talking about the guilt she carried, not about actual legal changes." "When did you decide to forge the documents?" The question hung in the air between them. Vivian was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if she would answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "After the funeral, when the will was read and there was nothing for me and I realized the monthly payments would stop." Vivian looked up at Elena with eyes red from crying. "I panicked, Elena. For 5 years, Mother's support had been the difference between dignity and destitution. Without it, I was looking at homelessness within months." "So you convinced yourself that Mother had intended to include you in the will?" "I convinced myself that she'd run out of time to do what she really wanted, which, according to these documents, was actually true." Vivian gestured toward the papers, "But that didn't give me the right to forge legal documents." David spoke for the first time since arriving. "Vivian, tell Elena about the meeting with Morrison." Vivian's composure cracked further. "I went to him for advice about contesting the will. I brought the letters from Mother and the bank records, thinking they might be evidence of her intentions. He looked at everything and said we didn't have enough for a successful challenge." "Then what happened?" "He asked if I had any other documentation, anything that might show Mother's true wishes. When I said no, he suggested that sometimes families make informal agreements that aren't properly documented. He said these kinds of situations happened more often than people realized." Elena felt a chill of understanding. "He offered to help you create documentation. He knew someone who specialized in reconstructing lost or damaged estate documents. Morrison said it wasn't technically illegal if we were just documenting what had actually been intended." Vivian's voice broke. "He made it sound like we were correcting an oversight, not committing fraud." Elena absorbed this revelation, understanding now how a desperate woman had been guided toward criminal behavior by an unscrupulous attorney. "Vivian, Morrison is using you. He's counting on the fact that you'll take the blame for fraud while he maintains plausible deniability. I know that now." Vivian straightened in her chair, showing flashes of the strength Elena remembered from their childhood. "Yesterday, after visiting you in the hospital, I told him I wanted to withdraw the lawsuit. He threatened to sue me for his fees and expenses if I didn't follow through with the case." David leaned forward. "Tell her the rest." Vivian took a shaky breath. "Morrison has been borrowing money against the expected settlement. He owes his document forger $15,000, and he's promised his expert witnesses significant fees. If the case doesn't proceed, he's financially exposed." Elena felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with ugly clarity. "So he needs you to continue with the fraud even if you want to stop. He says backing out now would be admitting guilt and opening me up to criminal prosecution. That my only choice is to see it through and hope for a favorable settlement." Vivian's voice carried the weight of someone trapped by her own poor choices. But watching you in that hospital bed knowing I caused the stress that put you there, I can't live with that, Elena. Whatever the consequences, I can't destroy my sister to save myself." Elena looked at Vivian, really looked at her, and saw not the calculating manipulator she'd been fighting, but a woman who'd made terrible decisions while drowning in desperation and bad advice. It didn't excuse the fraud, but it explained it in ways that transformed her understanding of both the crime and the criminal. "Vivian, I need you to understand something. The documents you forged aren't just wrong. They're completely contrary to what Mother actually wanted. She never intended to give you ownership of the house because she knew that would mean its destruction. But she did want to provide you with security and dignity." Quote, "I know that now." Vivian picked up Margaret's letter again, her fingers tracing their mother's careful handwriting. Reading this, it's like hearing her voice again, hearing her explain things she never had the chance to say when she was alive. Elena made a decision that surprised even her. "Vivian, I want to propose something. But first, I need you to do two things. I need you to formally admit that the will amendment is forged, and I need you to fire James Morrison and retain independent counsel who will represent your interests rather than his own financial needs." Vivian's eyes widened. "You're not going to have me arrested? That depends on what happens next. If you're willing to take responsibility for your actions and work toward a solution that honors what Mother actually wanted, then maybe we can find a path forward that serves justice without destroying what's left of our family." David spoke quietly from his corner. "Elena, that's generous, but Vivian needs to understand the legal risks she's facing." "I understand them," Vivian said, her voice growing stronger. "I understand that I committed fraud, that I let desperation drive me to criminal behavior, and that I nearly destroyed the sister I should have been protecting. But if Elena is offering a chance to make this right, I want to take it." Elena pulled out her phone and called Marcus, who appeared in the conference room within minutes. She quickly briefed him on the conversation while Vivian sat quietly, no longer the desperate woman who'd arrived with forged documents, but not yet the redeemed sister Elena hoped she might become. "Marcus, I want you to help Vivian find a reputable attorney who can represent her interests in withdrawing from this lawsuit and dealing with Morrison's threats. Someone who specializes in elder law and understands both criminal defense and estate planning." Marcus looked skeptical. "Elena, you're taking a significant legal risk if you don't pursue prosecution. I'm taking a human risk if I do." Elena turned back to Vivian. "But I need you to understand that this offer comes with conditions: complete honesty about everything that's happened, full cooperation in exposing Morrison's role in this fraud, and genuine commitment to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth rather than desperation." Vivian nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Whatever it takes, Elena. I want to finish what Mother started instead of destroying what she built." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not the cardiac stress that had landed her in the hospital, but the loosening of anger she'd carried for so long, it had become part of her identity. Looking at her sister across the table, she saw not an enemy to be defeated, but a family member to be reclaimed. The battle for the house was ending, but the work of rebuilding their family was just beginning. Elena stood at her mother's writing desk 3 days later, the morning light filtering through those familiar lace curtains as she drafted what might be the most important document of her professional life. Not an architectural blueprint this time, but a family restoration plan that would honor Margaret Browns interrupted intentions while creating something entirely new. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, difficult conversations, and surprising revelations. Vivian had retained Sarah Chen, no relation to David, a respected elder law attorney who specialized in family reconciliation and estate mediation. Morrison had responded to Vivian's withdrawal from the lawsuit with threats, counterclaims, and increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his expected fees. But the most significant development had come from an unexpected source: Judge Patricia Blackwood herself. Elena's phone rang, interrupting her concentration. Marcus's voice carried barely contained excitement. "Elena, you need to get down to the courthouse immediately. Judge Blackwood wants to see both parties in her chambers, without attorneys present." Is that normal? Nothing about this case has been normal. But Blackwood specializes in elder law, and she's been following the developments closely. I think she wants to facilitate a resolution before this gets any messier. Elena arrived at the courthouse to find Vivian already waiting in the hallway outside Judge Blackwood's chambers, looking nervous but determined. They'd spoken twice since the hospital conference room meeting, difficult conversations that had begun the slow work of rebuilding trust after decades of accumulated resentment. Judge Blackwood's chambers reflected her 30 years on the bench, law books, family photographs, and awards from various elder advocacy organizations. At 68, she possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from seeing thousands of families destroy themselves over money while claiming to fight for principle. "Sit down, both of you," Judge Blackwood said without preamble. "I've reviewed all the filings in this case, including the motion to withdraw the lawsuit and the evidence of document forgery. I've also had some very interesting conversations with the State Attorney General's office about Mr. Morrison's business practices." Elena and Vivian exchanged glances. They'd known that Morrison was being investigated, but not that it had reached the Attorney General's level. "Your case isn't unique," Judge Blackwood continued. "Morrison has used similar tactics with at least 6 other families over the past 3 years. Always targeting elderly clients facing estate disputes, always suggesting document reconstruction as a solution, always leaving his clients to face criminal charges while he maintains plausible deniability." Vivian paled. "Am I going to be arrested?" "That depends on several factors, including your cooperation with the ongoing investigation and your willingness to make restitution." Quote, Judge Blackwood leaned back in her chair. "But I didn't call you here to discuss criminal prosecution. I called you here because I've seen too many families destroy themselves fighting over inheritances when the real issue is unresolved emotional damage." Elena found her voice. "What do you suggest, Your Honor?" "I suggest you stop thinking like adversaries and start thinking like architects. Both of you." Judge Blackwood smiled slightly. "Elena, you've spent your career preserving buildings by adapting them to serve new purposes while maintaining their essential character. Vivian, you've spent yours in social work, helping families navigate transitions and trauma. Between you, you have all the skills needed to solve this problem." "I'm not sure I understand," Vivian said. Judge Blackwood pulled out a thick folder. "I've been researching your mother's consultation with estate attorneys. Did you know she wasn't just planning a trust arrangement? She was exploring the possibility of donating the property to the Historical Society while retaining family usage rights and creating an endowment for preservation work." Elena's architectural mind immediately grasped the implications. She wanted to preserve the house permanently while ensuring both daughters benefited from the family legacy. Exactly. But she died before finalizing the details. Judge Blackwood opened the folder, revealing consultation notes and preliminary architectural assessments. "The Historical Society is still interested, Elena. They've been waiting 3 months for you to contact them about your mother's preliminary discussions." Vivian looked confused. "How would that help me financially?" "Because the donation would generate significant tax advantages that could fund a substantial trust," Elena said, her mind racing through possibilities. "And if the family retained certain usage rights, you could have permanent housing security while I maintained stewardship responsibilities." Judge Blackwood nodded approvingly. "The Historical Society would gain a preserved Victorian property for educational and cultural use. The family would receive tax benefits, ongoing involvement, and resolution of the inheritance dispute. Most importantly, both daughters would honor their mother's actual intentions, rather than fighting over distorted versions of them." Elena felt excitement building, the same creative energy she'd experienced when designing solutions to complex architectural challenges. "We could create a model for how families handle legacy properties. Something that serves preservation, family needs, and community benefits simultaneously. But first," Judge Blackwood's tone grew serious, "you need to deal with the criminal aspects of this case. Vivian, your cooperation with the Morrison investigation could result in reduced charges or possibly immunity in exchange for testimony. But you have to be completely honest about everything that happened." Vivian straightened in her chair. "I'm ready to do that, Your Honor. I want to take responsibility for my choices and help stop Morrison from manipulating other families." "Good. Elena, Your willingness to explore restorative rather than punitive justice reflects well on your character, but you need to understand that you're under no obligation to protect your sister from the consequences of her actions. I understand that, Elena replied. But I also understand that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about healing damage and preventing future harm. Judge Blackwood smiled. Spoken like someone who's learned to see beyond immediate problems to long-term solutions. I'm going to give you 2 weeks to work with the Historical Society and develop a formal proposal. If you can create something that serves everyone's legitimate interests, I'll support it through the legal process. Elena and Vivian left the courthouse together, walking toward the harbor where their family's house commanded its century-old view of the bay. The conversation that followed was halting at first. Two women who'd spent decades as strangers trying to remember how to be sisters. I owe you an apology that goes far beyond the forgery, Vivian said as they reached the pier where they'd had their confrontational meeting just days earlier. I've spent 30 years being angry with you for succeeding instead of trying to build my own version of success. Elena leaned against the pier railing, watching fishing boats navigate the harbor entrance. I owe you an apology too. I wrote you off as irresponsible instead of trying to understand why you were struggling. I let you disappear from the family without fighting to keep you connected. We were both protecting ourselves in ways that hurt each other, Vivian said. But maybe it's not too late to do better. Elena turned to face her sister. Vivian, if we pursue this historical society option, it means you'd be living in the house again. As caretaker, as family member, as equal partner in preserving what Mother built, are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Vivian was quiet for several minutes, considering the question seriously. I don't know if I'm prepared, but I know I want to try. The house was never just about money for me, Elena. It was about belonging somewhere, about being part of something that mattered. If you're willing to trust me with that opportunity, I promise I won't waste it. Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Then let's go home and start planning. The next week passed in a blur of meetings, consultations, and negotiations that felt more like family therapy than legal proceedings. The Historical Society proved enthusiastic about acquiring the property, especially with Elena's architectural expertise ensuring proper preservation. The tax benefits were substantial enough to fund a trust that would provide Vivian with lifetime security while generating income for ongoing maintenance. Carmen and Isabella provided invaluable support, helping navigate the complex legal and financial structures required to make the arrangement work. Marcus coordinated with federal and state preservation agencies to maximize tax advantages and ensure the donation met all legal requirements. But the most important work happened in quieter moments. Elena and Vivian going through their mother's belongings together, sharing memories that had been buried under decades of resentment, slowly rebuilding the sisterly relationship that had been lost to misunderstanding and pride. They found more evidence of Margaret's intentions in unexpected places. Notes in cookbook margins about family recipes both daughters should preserve. Photographs carefully labeled with stories about relatives neither sister had known they shared. Even a draft letter never sent that explicitly described her hope that Elena and Vivian would find their way back to each other after her death. She orchestrated this, Vivian said one evening as they sat in the kitchen reviewing Historical Society documents. Maybe not the legal crisis, but the opportunity for us to work together on something that mattered to her. Elena looked around the kitchen where 3 generations of women had gathered for family meals, arguments, celebrations, and quiet conversations. She always said this house brought out the best in people who loved it. Maybe she trusted it to do the same for us. The formal signing took place on a crisp October morning in Judge Blackwood's courtroom, with representatives from the Historical Society, preservation agencies, and various family members in attendance. Morrison had been arrested the previous week on charges related to his document forgery scheme, his threats against Vivian having evaporated once his criminal exposure became apparent. Elena stood beside her sister as they signed documents transferring the property to the Historical Society, while retaining family stewardship rights and establishing the Margaret Browns Family Preservation Trust. Vivian would serve as resident caretaker while Elena maintained oversight of all preservation work. Both sisters would share in the ongoing management of the property and the family legacy it represented. It's not what any of us expected 6 weeks ago, Elena said as they walked out of the courthouse together. It's better, Vivian replied. It's what Mother actually wanted, just implemented 50 years later than she'd planned. Carmen and Isabella met them on the courthouse steps, along with David Chen and Sarah Chen. No relation, but they'd become friendly during the legal proceedings. The group walked to Pescatores for lunch, a celebration that felt more like a family reunion than a victory party. So what happens now? Isabella asked as they settled around a large table overlooking the harbor. Elena looked at Vivian, seeing not the desperate woman who'd arrived with forged documents, but a sister who'd found her way home through honesty, accountability, and the grace of second chances. Now we restore things, Elena said. The house, the family, the legacy, all of it. And we make sure other families don't go through what we did, Vivian added. Sarah thinks our case could be a model for other elder law disputes, a way to resolve inheritance conflicts through restoration rather than litigation. Carmen raised her wine glass. To Margaret Browns, who taught us that the best legacies are the ones that bring families together instead of tearing them apart. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she clinked glasses with her sister, her chosen family, and the new relationships that had emerged from crisis and conflict. Outside the restaurant windows, the Victorian house stood on its bluff overlooking the bay, ready to serve its next chapter as a bridge between past and future, family and community, preservation and progress. Judge Blackwood had been right. They'd stopped thinking like adversaries and started thinking like architects. And in doing so, they'd built something stronger and more lasting than either sister could have created alone. Spring arrived early in Millfield Bay, painting the Victorian house's wraparound porch with dappled sunlight filtered through budding oak trees. Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching Vivian work in their mother's garden, carefully transplanting seedlings with the patient precision of someone who'd finally found her place in the world. 6 months had passed since the courthouse signing, 6 months of daily discoveries about what it meant to share a family legacy rather than fight over its fragments. The house had been officially transferred to the Millfield Bay Historical Society, but it had never felt more like home. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. CNN wants to interview you both about the family preservation model. Are you ready for national attention? Elena smiled, remembering her initial resistance to publicity. The case had garnered media interest as a positive example of family dispute resolution, inspiring similar arrangements across the country. Law schools were teaching their story, and the American Bar Association had invited Elena and Vivian to speak at their annual conference on elder law. "Morning, coffee's ready," Vivian called from the back door, mud on her hands and satisfaction in her voice. "The Historical Society tour group arrives at 10, but we have an hour to go over the quarterly trust reports." Elena joined her sister at the kitchen table, where they'd been conducting their weekly business meetings since December. The Margaret Browns Family Preservation Trust had exceeded all expectations, generating enough income to maintain the property, pay Vivian a living wage as resident caretaker, and fund Elena's continuing work as preservation consultant. More importantly, it had given both sisters purpose that went beyond their individual needs. "The preservation grant came through," Elena said, spreading the official documents across the table. $200,000 for the foundation work and roof restoration. We'll be able to start construction next month. Vivian poured coffee into the china cups their mother had saved for special occasions, cups they now use daily, having learned that life itself was occasion enough. "Mrs. Patterson called yesterday. She wants to know if we'd consider adding her family's property to the preservation trust model. Apparently her children are already fighting over the inheritance. And she's not even sick." Elena had been fielding similar calls weekly. The idea of family preservation trusts was spreading, offering an alternative to the estate battles that destroyed so many relationships. "I told the Hendersons we'd meet with them next week. Their Victorian is in better condition than ours was, but they're facing the same generational transition issues." "Do you ever wonder what Mother would think of all this?" Vivian asked, settling into her chair with the comfortable ease of someone who belonged there. Elena considered the question seriously. 6 months of living together had taught both sisters to think before speaking, to consider the weight of words and the power of honesty. "I think she'd be amazed that her death brought us together instead of driving us further apart," And I think she'd love knowing that her guilt about family favoritism ended up creating a model for family healing. She always said the house had good energy, Vivian mused, that it brought out people's better angels. Maybe she was right. Elena looked around the kitchen that had witnessed decades of family meals, arguments, celebrations, and quiet conversations. The house did seem to encourage honesty and reconciliation in ways that neither sister fully understood. Historical society visitors often commented on the peaceful atmosphere, the sense of continuity that made past and present feel connected rather than separate. "There's something I need to tell you," Vivian said, her voice taking on the careful tone that had preceded several important conversations over the past months. "David asked me to marry him again." Elena's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Again? Last night, we were having dinner at that new place on Harbor Street, and he said living through this crisis had reminded him why he fell in love with me in the first place." Vivian's cheeks carried a faint blush that made her look decades younger. "Before I made all those terrible choices driven by desperation and fear." Elena set down her cup, studying her sister's face. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, hopeful, grateful that someone still believes I'm worth loving despite everything I've done." Vivian's voice grew stronger, "But also different than I was the first time we were married. I'm not the woman who ran away from problems or expected other people to solve them for me." Elena felt a complex mix of emotions: happiness for her sister, concern about repeating past mistakes, and something that might have been protectiveness. Living together had made her genuinely care about Vivian's well-being in ways she hadn't experienced since they were children. "What did you tell him?" "That I needed to talk to my sister first." Vivian smiled. "That I've learned the importance of making major decisions with family input instead of in isolation." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. 6 months ago, Vivian wouldn't have considered her opinion worth seeking. Now they consulted each other about everything from paint colors to preservation priorities to personal relationships. "Do you love him?" "I do. Differently than before, but maybe better. I love him for standing by me during the worst period of my life, for helping me find the courage to take responsibility for my mistakes, for believing I could become someone worth restoring." Vivian reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "But I also love the life we've built here, the work we're doing together, the family we've become. I don't want to lose that." Elena squeezed her sister's fingers. "You wouldn't lose it. David loves this house almost as much as we do. And frankly, having someone around who's handy with electrical work wouldn't hurt the preservation efforts." Vivian laughed. "So you approve?" "I approve of your happiness. And I approve of the woman you've become. Someone who considers consequences, asks for advice, and makes decisions based on love rather than fear." Elena's voice grew serious. "But Vivian, you don't need my permission to build a life with someone you love. You've earned the right to make your own choices." "I know, but I also know that consulting family before making major decisions is something I should have learned decades ago." Vivian stood and moved to the window overlooking the garden. "Besides, if David and I remarry, it would be here, in this house, with the family we've rebuilt together. It seems right that we'd all decide together." Elena joined her sister at the window, both women looking out at the grounds where historical society visitors would soon arrive for their weekly tour. In the distance, the bay sparkled with morning light, fishing boats heading out for the day's work while sailboats prepared for weekend recreation. "There's something I need to tell you too," Elena said. "Carmen wants me to consider running for the town council. The preservation seat is opening up, and she thinks our family trust model gives me credibility on land use issues." Vivian turned to face her. "That's wonderful. You'd be perfect for that role." "I'm not sure I want the public attention. And it would mean spending more time away from the house and our preservation work." "Elena, you've spent your entire career preserving individual buildings. This would let you preserve the entire community." Vivian's voice carried excitement and conviction. "Besides, I'm perfectly capable of managing the day-to-day operations here. We've proven that over the past 6 months." Elena felt a familiar flutter of the protective instincts that had shaped her relationship with the house and its legacy. Learning to share responsibility had been one of her greatest challenges during their reconciliation. "Are you sure you'd be comfortable with that level of independence?" Vivian's smile carried gentle understanding. "Elena, one of the most important things I've learned this year is the difference between independence and isolation. I spent decades choosing isolation because I was afraid of disappointing people who depended on me. Now I have the security of knowing I belong somewhere, and the confidence of knowing I can handle responsibility without running away from it." Elena nodded, recognizing the truth in her sister's words. Vivian had transformed over the past months from someone who avoided accountability to someone who embraced it. She'd proven herself as a caretaker, a tour guide, a preservation advocate, and a sister worth trusting. "Then yes, I'll consider the council position, but we make campaign decisions together, just like everything else." "Deal." Vivian checked the kitchen clock. "The tour group will be here in 20 minutes. Today's theme is Architecture as Family Legacy, and we have that journalist from the Preservation magazine joining us." Elena felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Media attention still made her uncomfortable, though she'd learned to appreciate its value in spreading their family's story to people facing similar challenges. Ready for another interview about how giving your sister exactly what she deserved turned out to mean something completely different than revenge? Vivian laughed, ready to explain again that sometimes justice means healing rather than punishment, and that the best legacies are the ones that bring families together instead of tearing them apart. They moved through the house together, making final preparations for the tour. In the front parlor, Elena straightened the display case containing their mother's letters, the forged documents that had started their crisis, and the legal papers that had resolved it. The Historical Society had created an exhibit about family estate disputes and creative resolution methods, using the Brown sisters' story as a case study. Visitors often asked how Elena could forgive such serious betrayal, how she could trust someone who'd committed fraud against her. The answer had evolved over months of living together, working together, and slowly rebuilding the relationship they'd lost to decades of misunderstanding. "Forgiveness isn't about pretending the harm didn't happen," Elena would tell them. "It's about choosing what you do with the harm once it's done. You can let it define your relationship forever, or you can use it as the foundation for building something stronger." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first tour group members. Elena and Vivian took their positions in the front hall, ready to welcome visitors to the house that had taught them both that family legacy wasn't about what you inherited, it was about what you created together. "Welcome to the Margaret Browns house," Elena began, using the greeting that had become familiar over dozens of tours. "This Victorian home has been in our family for 4 generations, and it nearly became the source of our destruction before teaching us that preservation and reconciliation often require the same skills." Vivian stepped forward, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd found her place in the world. "6 months ago, my sister and I were strangers fighting over property. Today, we're partners in preserving not just this house, but the model of family healing that saved our relationship." Elena looked at her sister, seeing not the desperate woman who'd arrived with forged documents, but the family member she'd always hoped Vivian could become. Strong, responsible, committed to something larger than her individual needs. What had started as a battle over inheritance had become something neither sister could have imagined, a partnership that honored their mother's interrupted intentions while creating opportunities neither could have achieved alone. Elena had indeed given Vivian exactly what she deserved, not punishment for her desperate choices, but the chance to prove she was capable of earning trust, building something valuable, and becoming the family member she'd always wanted to be. As the tour group filed into the parlor, and Elena began explaining the architectural details that had shaped 4 generations of family life, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from preservation work. Well done. She'd saved more than a building. She'd restored a family, created a model for others facing similar challenges, and honored her mother's memory in ways that Margaret Browns herself couldn't have planned. The house stood strong on its foundation, ready to shelter new stories while preserving old ones. And in its kitchen each morning, 2 sisters shared coffee and conversation, proving that sometimes the most important architecture was the kind that built bridges between people who'd forgotten how to be family. Outside, the bay sparkled with promise, and inside, the work of preservation continued, not just of buildings and belongings, but of the relationships that made houses into homes and strangers into family. Elena had learned that the greatest legacy wasn't what you left behind, but what you built together with the people you chose to love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,